In the studio, I've got Patrick Kelly, who's the Chief Director, Price Statistics at Statistics South Africa. Very tricky word to get around, statistics, but I went very slowly to make sure that I captured it. But thanks again for making time and coming to chat to us. I wanted you, if you like, to pick up the main trends that contribute to the numbers that we saw in the acceleration to 4.5%.
Well, I think some of the interesting features in this particular month are the impact of excise tax and other tax increases on certain products, particularly alcoholic beverages. We see the sugar tax increasing as well, fuel taxes increasing. We've also seen an increase in the fuel price, which always has an impact on the CPI on a month-to-month basis, and a subsequent impact, for example, on public transport.
Yeah.
This month we also survey education fees,
right.
And so that comes in as a once-off for the year.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's get into the detail of it. In terms of impact, though, what did you say was the main contributory factor to this 4.5% headline number?
Well, if we look at the excise taxes, they do impact on alcoholic beverages and tobacco.
Yeah.
And so we've seen those going up to 6.5% annual rates, 2% increase in the month. Tobacco products increasing by almost 4% in the month, up to 6.1%, which is really a high rate. We also see fizzy drinks, which are subject to the sugar tax, which was introduced last year for the first time.
Yes.
These have now reached a very high level of 16.8% year-on-year increase.
This is interesting because normally, actually, we tend to sort of forget the budget once the numbers are out. It's almost like we get hit by the shock and then we discount it and then we forget it actually comes later to impact, like the one that you're talking about, the fizzy drinks. This is from a year ago.
Well, certainly, most of these taxes are introduced by retailers on a gradual basis. And we've seen this fizzy drinks in particular increasing over the past year to reach this level. Obviously, it's also informed by increases in the sugar price and other factors, not just the tax. But certainly, studies have shown that most taxes are introduced incrementally over a period of time.
Yeah. So how big an impact have we seen coming out of this year's budget and the other changes that have been made in the previous budgets?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, one of the other factors...
Are you able to tease it out and actually give us just a sense of the impact that we saw?
Yeah, it's quite difficult to tease it out specifically, partly because the tax is part of a bigger price. And as I said, it's introduced incrementally over a period of time. So it is difficult to tease out. In some cases, the prices increase significantly more than the tax. In other cases, it's more subdued.
But what I'm getting from you is that these are all above inflation increases, in other words, above the current inflation rate.
You know, if we look at this the other way, and we look at administered prices, which are prices generally set by some kind of organ of state, that's sitting at 7.9% compared to the average 4.5% that we see for inflation overall. So that does point to government-related increases having a higher than inflation impact.
Yeah, so when the Reserve Bank talks about people being, you know, employers being mindful of the impact on inflation when they increase their wages, etc., and that kind of thing, and the unions, etc., they should all be pointing a finger at government because we're seeing this huge increase. I mean, that's double the inflation rate at the moment. Anyway, this is just a statement that I'm making. Nothing that you can respond.
No comment on that.
No comment. I'll take it back from you. Let's talk about the energy impact because we know we had a big increase in energy prices in March, and this obviously is now beginning to be felt. How big did we get hit?
Sure. Well, the fuel index increased by 5.5% between February and March.
Right.
It's now sitting at 8.8%. If we were to split it between petrol and diesel, petrol is slightly lower at around about 7.5% year on year, but diesel's actually in double digits, just above 10. So diesel drivers, and that obviously then has an impact on trucks and other transport things which may have a down the river kind of impact.
Right.
A more immediate impact on consumers is public transport.
Yes.
And so, for example, public transport overall is just over 10%.
We're talking about the taxis in general, we're talking about the buses, we're talking about the trains.
Absolutely. So if we took, for example, taxis are sitting at 11.4% year on year.
Right.
So that's your you know, not well off commuters are having to fork out that much more.
That's actually your working population right there.
Correct.
Yeah.
So that does have an impact on those consumers, and the working. And I'm quite sure that most salary increases are not at 11%.
Definitely not.
And we do also know that people spend a lot on transport because of our kind of geographic dispersal in our cities.
Yeah, 100%. Actually, I'm reminded of the strike by the Sibanye workers because they've been asking for an increase right about there, and they've been denied it, of course, and therefore you can almost say they've got some kind of justification. The education survey and food. Let's put those two together in terms of impact.
Sure. Well, let's just talk about education briefly. We survey education fees once a year.
Right.
Overall, Education came out at 6.7% year on year.
Again, above inflation.
Above inflation, but in line with last year's increase.
Okay.
What we've seen is that schools have slightly smaller increases, so they're at around about 6.5%, 7, up to 7, whereas universities' increases have pushed up a little bit to 6.2 from 5.3 the year before. So that you should also remember that for educational services, a large part of their budget is personnel.
Yeah.
And so it's ratcheted a little bit to salary increases that they have to pay.
That's true.
Food, and we're talking about, Sibanya or other workers and how that impacts, because clearly the poorer sections of the community have a higher proportion of food in their budget. Food inflation at the moment is only at 2.3% and is flat from last month. What we are seeing is that bread and cereals prices, so bread, maize, etc., are increasing quite rapidly, and that's currently at 6.1%.
Yeah.
Brown bread, for example, has increased by 10% year on year. Meat prices, on the other hand, are actually in deflation.
Yeah.
So we're seeing price decreases across the board on most meat products.
Yeah.
And so that's at negative 1.1 this month.
Which is a good thing, because I was reading earlier on another publication how actually a moderate intake of red meat results, or there's a link, let me put it this way, I need to be careful here, there's a link with colon cancer, and therefore we should be eating less meat. Therefore the less meat we eat, the better. It's a good thing. I wanted to talk about the month-on-month picture, because that was unchanged, right?
Yes, that's right.
0.8%, I think that was the month-on-month increase compared to the previous month, which surprises me given these other one-offs that are coming into this month's number. How is that?
Well, look, there's 400 odd products in the basket, and they all have different movements on a month-to-month basis. So, when we're looking at the 0.8 or the 4.5, it's really an aggregate of a whole range of different numbers that are moving up and down within the month. So, I mean, if we do look at the month-to-month figure, and we look at some of the specific contributions, they're typically the ones that we've been talking about. So, alcoholic beverages and tobacco, transport, education are items that have contributed to the month-on-month figure.
Yeah.
I mean, on a year-to-year basis, one can look at other factors. So, for example, insurance has got quite a big impact. That category is at 0.9 of the 4.5.
Right.
So almost a quarter, or just under a quarter of the total impact is in miscellaneous, which includes insurance, is quite a big portion of that. And food obviously impacts because it's a big weight item on an annual basis. So, but if one looks at the month-to-month trends, pretty much food has been below average inflation. Services, as you reflected in your introduction, is higher than average inflation. And the petrol prices are tending to cause the month-to-month fluctuations.